I hope that everyone enjoyed the film today. I want to thank the Utah Film Center and Science on Screen for bringing this film to our community and to the scientists who made innovations such as this virtual screening possible. My name is Havilah Clarke, and as a native Utahn and a woman who has long worked adjacent to the sciences, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome three incredibly accomplished women in STEM to our discussion today. As role models and advocates for women in sciences in Utah, I'm incredibly grateful that they have taken their time to share their career journeys and personal stories with us today. First, I'd like to welcome Tina Larson, the current president and COO of Recursion Pharmaceuticals. Having held global leadership roles at Equitable, Genentech, and Roche, Tina has more than 20 years of experience in developing and manufacturing biopharmaceuticals for unmet medical needs. The medicines she has helped to advance target a spectrum of serious illnesses, including cancer, heart attack, stroke, cystic fibrosis, severe asthma, and drug-resistant bacterial infections. She has received numerous awards and recognitions, including most recently the Utah Business Magazine CXO of the Year for 2020. Also joining us today is Cynthia Furse, professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at the University of Utah. She is a fellow of the IEEE and the National Academy of Inventors, and held the Associate VP for Research at the University of Utah from 2009 to 2019. Her technological innovations and patents include development of a system to locate intermittent electrical faults on aging aircraft wiring, with which she founded a successful spin-off company, Livewire Innovation. She is also a pioneering researcher in the development of telemetry antennas for medical implants and fast methods for predicting the statistical variation in bioelectromagnetic applications. She also has received numerous teaching and research awards, including the 2009 IEEE Harriet B. Regas Medal for Excellence in Teaching. And last but certainly not least, we have with us today Jane Wheeler, who is the Director of Quality and Regulatory at Total Joint Orthopedics, a strategic leader passionate about connecting ideas to execution and solving real problems in healthcare, biotech, and medtech. Jane has more than 14 years of product development and cross-functional operational experience in medical devices, digital health, and in vitro diagnostics. Jane was previously COO of a digital health company called Epitel that was revolutionizing how people living with epilepsy monitor seizures through digital wearables. She currently holds 4 patents for her work, and if that wasn't enough, she also runs 100-mile trail races for fun. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. And given everyone's had a chance to see the film, I'd love for each of you to share with us a little bit about your career journeys. What got you interested in science? How did you come to the profession? And what resonated for you in this film? Jean, do you mind if we go ahead and start with you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Havilah. And I'm excited to be here with everyone tonight. I hope everybody enjoyed the film. I really enjoyed it, and it touched a special place in my heart, having been a woman working through science and many of the challenges that were surfaced in this film tonight. My background, as Havilah mentioned, has been in the med tech and healthcare med device industry. I got into it through a long wandering road, but it all started with science and being immersed in the sciences growing up. My father was an electrical and computer engineering professor at the University of Illinois, and naturally all of his kids got to play with all of his lab toys. So as a young child, I was surrounded by the opportunity to play with dry ice in the lab and learn about how you regrow neural brain cells on chips for future regeneration. And that was absolutely fascinating to me as a young child, and I can honestly not remember wanting to do anything else growing up. I was fascinated with the human body and the application of medicine and engineering and how we can connect those two throughout innovation and development by creating new solutions that can reach patients and people to help us continually treat patients and improve therapeutics for the continuing challenges in healthcare. I graduated with a degree in materials engineering and have spent my career in the startup space, so helping companies get from inception to getting a product on the market, mostly in vitro diagnostics and med tech, most recently with the epilepsy space, connecting digital health wearables and trying to advance technology to actual solutions in healthcare. And now I am working at Total Joint Orthopedics, where we are trying to improve efficiency for getting orthopedic large joint hip and knee replacements to patients and improve efficiency in the way we deliver these systems to patients throughout the market.
So Tina, you have a similar background, and one of the things that I found interesting about all of you is that you are all engineers, which is one of the professions that wasn't gone into a lot of detail in the film. But can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and your career path, and how it might have been similar or different to Jane's?
Yeah, so I'm a biochemical engineer by training, and actually similar to Gene, my father's also an electrical engineer. He actually got his degree at University of Utah, where he met my mother. And so I similarly, I grew up with that modeling in my household. My father went to work for Hewlett Packard in 1969. He got to see this incredible journey of Hewlett Packard. He actually still works at the same site. He's having a really hard time. He's retired 3 times. He's having a hard time getting away from it. He loves it. He's always loved engineering. I grew up with a basement full of every generation of Hewlett Packard technology, oscilloscopes. I remember playing with, as a young child. My father's donated a lot of that to the Denver Museum of Technology. It's so historical now. And so I guess for me, like I really believe a lot, like you can become what you can see, right? So role modeling, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more, is I feel so important. And of course, my father wasn't a role model of a female scientist or a female engineer, but I also had an amazing mother who, while her degree was actually in economics and history. She was born in Carbon County, Utah, daughter of a coal miner, first in her, family to go to college, just this amazing woman who overcame all the odds. You can imagine being born in the 40s in Utah in poverty, right? And becoming the first in your family to attend University of Utah. And so I think there was I had very strong role modeling, in my home, even though it wasn't specifically, I never knew a female scientist. I never knew a female engineer, but I think I had the, I was kind of set up to go into the sciences and engineering. And I think that matters a lot. It's something I think about a lot, of how could every child, I think most children are actually born scientists in their own way. Like, how could they all have role models like that? And so I got a degree in chemical and biochemical engineering. I've been, this is my 25th year's anniversary, so 25 years this year in the biotechnology industry. During that time, I've worked at some incredible companies. My father got to see Hewlett Packard through a lot of its glory years. I got to see a company called Genentech, which is largely considered the founder of the biotechnology industry, kind of through the its really major growth and innovation years. And so I've had an incredible career, and then the ability to come here to Utah and be part of the burgeoning biotech industry here. So really excited to be here. I've got tons of thoughts on the film. I started just bawling about halfway through, and we can maybe talk about the scene where Dr. Hopkins, hands the letter over to her colleague and is kind of waiting to see if she's going to get support. I lost it. And I think, other than maybe, some of the more, the stories of Antarctica, being a woman in color, there's a few things in there that I couldn't resonate, but every single other thing, there was a story that I could remember a time in my life where I'd experienced something similar. So it was actually quite emotional, from front to end, watching the whole film. So incredibly well done. And just really happy to be, I'm so happy it was made, and we're here talking about it.
That's great. That's great. Actually, Cindy shared with me that she has some more, she does have some experience in Antarctica, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit later. But Cindy, how did you come into engineering? What were some of your driving factors?
Well, my family's from rural Maine. My dad was a first-generation college student, and it was his step out of poverty. He was a nutrition professor at Utah State. And I always loved science and math and music and theater, and there wasn't really anything I didn't like. but the science and math really resonated. And I was doing a job shadow with a woman pediatrician, and she sent a little boy for an MRI scan. And I'm like, oh, I want to help people. I want to change the world. She's like, then it's not the doctor, it's the person who made that MRI machine. And that's when I got my first taste of the power of these degrees. I had an absolutely amazing physics teacher, Mr. Bradford, who asked me, you know, have you thought about engineering? I didn't know anything about engineering. I didn't know anything about engineering. I didn't know what an engineer was. And when I did find out, I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. I could change the world with that. So I literally went into engineering to change the world. I started at the University of Utah in mechanical engineering. I actually switched to electrical when I found how cool it really was. And I've loved my degrees here. I actually got my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD at the University of Utah. And then I went back to Utah State, Logan, and I taught there for 5 years, loved it. Excellent schools in the state of Utah. But my passion was back here. We live up Emigration Canyon, and it's a magic place. And so we came back, and I've been here ever since. It's a fantastic career because I get to work with our young people, like people that are just discovering the magic of this stuff. And I get to see the light bulbs turn on, and it's really rewarding, like every day.
That's wonderful. And one of the things I found really interesting about the three of you is that all of your dads were in the sciences. So it wasn't that mother role model who really influenced you, but it was your father. And Cindy, you shared with me a little bit earlier a really interesting statistic I hope you can share with the rest of our viewers today.
Yeah, when I was in graduate school, when I was getting my PhD, there were less than 300 women in electrical engineering getting their PhD in the entire country. And so there was a researcher, I believe funded by a National Science Foundation, who called and interviewed all of us, and then later sent us the results of the study. And it really did say that the dominant factor was having a strong, close male model. It might have been a father, it might have been a grandfather, an uncle, close friend, but that really made a difference. So it's the Utah daddies that can have a huge impact on the Utah girls. And the message was, every little girl wants to be pretty, but my dad would always introduce me as his smart daughter. And that made a huge difference. So the Utah daddies can have a real impact here.
So there were some really powerful moments in the film. And among them was this idea that, you know, if you can see it, you can be it. So there were moments in the film where Raychelle could not see anyone that she could aspire to be. You know, she saw people in film. She didn't necessarily see people in her range. Are you seeing that change in the sciences, either in academia or in businesses?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you are all accomplished women in the sciences, right? We know that there's a leaky pipeline. What more needs to happen? What is still missing? Who do you look up to?
I say, I don't know why we got so silent there, but I'd say yes and no is maybe my answer, and that I do think change is real, right? And I think particularly if we can look on a multi-generational time frame, right? Like, you know, I see my mother had incredibly limited opportunities. You know, I came out at a time where I feel like at least my generation was like, wow, they're going to let me be an engineer, like sweet, you know, but what I'm seeing in the, a younger generation is that they're expecting not even just to be let in the door, but to actually be treated, you know, equally, right? And so I do think there's, looking on a multi-decade time frame, I definitely see lots of reasons to be optimistic about the future. I think we're seeing almost, in engineering and computer science, we're still pretty low in terms of female participation in getting degrees, but in sciences broadly, women have made incredible progress, at every level. In industry, we do start to see a pipeline fall off with tenure, particularly seniority going up in companies. Very proud at Recursion that we do track gender statistics across every level of the company, entry level, manager, director, all the way up through C-suite executives. And, you know, and all of those levels, we've achieved about 40%, you know, give or take at every level of the company. Most companies, and we compare that against the national average, most companies at every single level, as you get up in the company, the percentage of women drops off. And so, and then when you get to boards, and this includes, you know, I'll admit, the Recursion board, the gender equity gets terrible, you know. And so I think there's some real signs for optimism. We're getting more women educated. We're getting women into the door of companies. You know, we still have room to go, in my opinion, of getting women, like we need women in all levels of leadership. Senior most, women need to get funded. The record of VC funding for women is terrible and has gotten worse in the last year. And then of course we need to get women on boards and governance. And so, and then I think there's a whole nother level of making sure that, you know, women of color, which was also addressed in the movie, that we're really lifting up all boats. So a lot of reason for, I'm very optimistic that we're heading in the right direction, but I just don't think we can get there fast enough, in my opinion.
And one of the things that I find is really interesting in Utah is that we have really great numbers in the sciences in high school. We have really great numbers in terms of the people that are graduating with degrees. But then as you look at us against the national averages, we actually underperform when we index for the percentage of women who actually have jobs in the sciences. So we have an increased growth in opportunities, but we're seeing more and more of those opportunities being taken by men. What are you doing, each of you, either in academia for Cindy or Tina or Jean, in your respective companies to help ensure that these balances change?
Well,
there's the hiring process.
Let me actually talk about the University of Utah, because we're right here. We really do want more diversity in our engineering, all of our departments. And it's women, it's ethnic diversity. We want people that can think differently and have a varied thinking pattern, so that we can solve many of the more wicked problems in the world, the more difficult problems. So we really care. So if a woman, let's talk particularly, were to come into the College of Engineering, the odds that she would receive a scholarship are very high. We have some special programs that, like the Access program, that allows freshman women to work with experienced scientists. So I have an Access student right now, like literally this afternoon, working in my lab, which is a freshman who's barely gotten started. And it's so much fun for me to be able to work with them. And I hope for them to be able to work with me. So we have some really good programs all along. The very best thing, I think, for a young woman is to get directly involved in the culture. Like literally just get into a research lab, start working with someone, start experimenting. You'll learn quickly, they'll help you. And we have those opportunities, and I'm really pleased to participate in those myself. So I have several, both women and men. I have a wide variety of people in my lab, and I'm very proud of my students and how they rise from their very first uncertain day to be real professionals in their own right.
Jean, did you?
Yeah, and I'll touch on your previous question a little bit. I am optimistic about the future, thinking I'm about 15, 16 years into my career out of college. And when I started out, I was often the only female on a technical team. And now looking at this next generation who's coming out into the workforce, I see multiple women and much higher percentages in the sciences and technical teams. So I'm really excited to see them come in fearless, not expecting this to be a problem, and also the younger women on some of the teams I've worked with are getting engaged in that culture that you talked about, Cindy. Like, how can I make this equal? How can I have these conversations? Whereas, when I started 10 years ago, I was terrified to even bring that up. Of why are women not getting paid the same? Why is this a problem? What is gender harassment? So I am optimistic. I think there's absolutely more that we can do on a daily basis. And something that's really interesting to me is how do we connect these people with these young women with mentorship opportunities, both in the company and external, to help them develop skill sets that are not channeled in this single role that they're in, but enable them to be successful and to continue to grow and have resources that maybe are outside the company and help them suss through some of these problems that we're hearing about in the film tonight. And I think that's absolutely important to continuing to build the diversity in the field here.
Absolutely. One of the things that I found really interesting, there's a lot of discussion around equity, right? Social justice has been really hit a turning point in 2020. But if we talk about gender equity, you usually hear more about the sexual harassment piece. And what I thought was so intriguing about the film is that it's really looking at the iceberg, all of the things under the iceberg. So it was Nancy Hopkins getting gaslit and being told that, no, the numbers that she measured in the MIT labs were just not accurate. And that's when she became a radical activist against her wishes. And Dr. Willenbring noted that, in spite of physical and verbal attacks, which to me were very shocking, it was really the question of competence that got under her skin. So these nuanced microaggressions, can each of you share a little bit, what you've experienced in your own careers and how you've dealt with that? Have you spoken up, or is it something that you've kept to yourself? Tina, I'll pick
Yeah,
one.
I mean, I've got too many stories to choose from, unfortunately. And I think two of the quotes from the movie, and actually Jean, brought this one up earlier today when we were chatting ahead of time, was like, a ton of feathers is still a ton. And I mean, I'm going to remember that forever, because that's what it feels like. I think the other one that came up, was like when Dr. Hopkins was looking back and she said, I spent 20 hours a week on this, and thinking like, what if she was spent 20 hours, that same 20 hours a week curing cancer, right? Instead of trying to fight sexism at MIT. And so those really resonated and made me really reflect on all of, the microaggressions, and just all of the kind of baggage that has come with being a woman, over the years. And I'll just give one story which stands out. And this is a Bay Area story. So this isn't a Utah story. Utah definitely, ranks pretty high on kind of most sexist state kind of studies. And, but this is everywhere. I spent more than 20 years working in the Bay Area, which is, presumably quite a progressive area. I was taking a course at Stanford University for executives, and I was chatting at the beginning with the CEO of a company, and this is the CEO of a company in Europe, has a lot of engineers reporting to him. And I was saying, I started my career as an automation engineer, coding these manufacturing systems at Genentech. And he just looked at me and he's like, oh, that's weird. I didn't think chicks could code. And this was not that many years ago, right? And this was in, the Bay Area, very progressive Stanford, presumably very progressive university. And this is nothing against Stanford, but it just, it's just one of those things. And he said it, I'm sure he didn't remember it 30 seconds after he said it. He just kept going on chit-chatting like nothing had happened. I'm going to remember it the day I die, decades later, right? And so I think that's, and it's one of many, I've got, that one's a little bit, I've got better and worse stories, but I think that's kind of encapsulates just that little, what to him was probably just a super offhanded comment. And I know he employs a lot of software engineers, and clearly none of them are women, because he didn't even know chicks could code. But I think those are the kind of stories that like just kept popping up over and over in my mind in the movie, and thinking, I don't even think I took the time to realize how much, and of a drag that can be, having to kind of go through that every day. So I thought the movie did an incredible job actually of highlighting that. I don't even remember what the question was, but once I start telling that story, that's it. So.
Okay, just your experience with microaggressions and how do you cope with those? I thought it was really interesting to hear that, it wasn't until there was that aha moment where she felt like she had to do something, that by keeping things inside, she wasn't changing the system. And even her allies didn't see the impact that it had, and so turned a blind eye. So, what's our responsibility as women, and what are your responsibilities as women in the sciences to help combat that, whether it's that immediate correction, whether it's, you know, making the bigger claims, you know, the Title IX in the example of Dr. Willenbring, bringing that to light. You know, how have you coped? Have you seen where you could have coped better? And how have you maybe equipped others to combat some of these challenges that they're experiencing?
So I'm actually the oldest of this bunch. I started my technical journey in 1981 when I began my bachelor's degree. And throughout that entire time, the tradition was that women were strong, you could deal with this, you could handle it. And that is how I've gone through my career. It's been great, okay? But it actually was this movie when I first saw the statement that the reason she got so upset was when her little girl looked at her and said, "Mommy, I want to be just like you." And that's when you realize that you haven't fixed the world for the next generation coming up. And that was key and critical. And yes, I cried. I have a daughter who's in electrical engineering. She has an MS and an MBA. She's a strong and powerful woman. And then I have many, many young women that I have raised technically. You know, they are my technical children. And they go out into the corporate world and they call me and they say, "What would you do about this? And what would you do about this? And what would you do about this?" And that's where I've realized that as now a senior woman, I have to step up for them. It's not about me being strong. That's not helpful. It's about me being noisy. It's about me sharing the problems that they are having when they can't, perhaps, when they are vulnerable and I am less. So this movie actually touched me very much, realizing how much, okay, so it's not the movie that told me things hadn't changed. It was the fact that I received 3 calls in the same week from young women working in engineering in the state of Utah who had terrible, beyond microaggressions going on. Like, no, this is 2021. We must fix it. We must fix it now.
It's really difficult to hear. It's really difficult to hear. And given you've spent a lot of your career in Utah, Cindy, I'd really love to hear from Tina and Jean if they see any differences between Utah and other places. What are the similarities? Are there things that are unique to our state that we should pay particular attention to?
I'm gonna let Jean go first because we've actually chatted about this a little bit in a previous account, so I would love to hear from her.
Yeah, and I want to answer your other question first, but
Go for it.
I'm trying to figure out what order to go on. Differences in the state is interesting. I see them in different ways. I worked in Southern California for about eight years after college before I moved out to Salt Lake. And having worked for small companies, I think I saw differences in different ways. I saw a lot of microaggressions in my work in the San Diego and Santa Barbara area, from being left out of the technical conversation and data review. And, you know, those are under the tip of the iceberg, and you just think, I got to work harder to keep up. And you can't possibly think it's because you're a woman, because I had a great, a great upbringing and a great college education where, you know, I was 51% female in my graduating class. So coming out to Utah, people were a lot more blatant in much different ways, which surprised me. And you know, one of the comments I got, which adds into that ton of feathers, is nobody cares how good a job you're doing. You should go home at 4:30 like all the other women in the office. And that is a comment that, you know, I will probably remember for the rest of my life. And, you know, I will work very hard to make sure that anybody who works for me or with me never has to hear a comment like that ever again. But so I would say, like, the differences in the California state are there more subtleties and slipped in the background in joking ways, whereas Utah, I felt like I got a little bit more blatant comments that really surprised me and stunned me, and I didn't know what to do with them, to be honest.
Yeah, I would say I have a similar to Jean in that I feel like the experienced plenty of what I would say maybe implicit sexism in California. It's almost like everybody there's been trained not to be explicitly sexist, but there's still plenty of, you know, unconscious bias and sexism in other ways. You know, my Stanford story earlier was somebody from Europe, right? So Utah, I think probably the most shocking thing has been that almost like the language of sexism, like nobody has gotten the memo that it's not okay anymore. And, you know, and using like a non-professional example, like I was you know, getting my work done in my backyard and asked for like drawings from the landscaper, and the landscaper just like looked at me, a client, right? That has, you know, like, you know, he's giving you money to redo my backyard, and just said, oh, I know women can't read 2D drawings. I'll send you a video. And I was just thinking, I'm an engineer. Like, are you going to send my husband the drawings? He doesn't care about the drawings, right? Like I built plants off of drawings, you know? And it was just interesting because I think it was, I just moved here, and I think just in the Bay Area, something that you would just know that would, you know, you wouldn't be able to get work by making a comment like that to a woman. And so it actually reminded me, I worked quite a bit in Switzerland. And Switzerland actually, and Utah culture actually were somewhat similar. You know, for example, women in Switzerland were expected to go home at lunch and feed their children. You know, they didn't have school at lunches. We actually worked to try to get women daycare in the evenings because we had a 9-hour time difference between our two major work hubs. And it was actually, the city government wouldn't allow it, right? So there was a very high expectation there that women were primarily caregivers and could kind of work in between the hours in which they were required to be with the family. And there I also felt that the sexism language was far more explicit. And so I was maybe a little bit prepared for it coming to Utah, but experiencing it within the United States was actually, yeah, it was a learning curve, I guess, to be. Having said that, my other experience in Utah, also like that, and the amount of support for women here that I have found has been unbelievable. One of the first groups I got kind of introduced to was the Women Tech Council, an incredible group of women lifting up women in all sorts of ways. Utah Business Magazine do these kind of like, you know, women to watch. I've met so many organizations here, women entrepreneurs, W Promote, like I think at the same time have experienced, and even the company that I work at is very gender equitable. And so I've both experienced a culture where there's more explicit racism just in the language and being out on a day-to-day basis, and yet also probably more support for women in a very tangible way than I'd ever experienced in a more progressive place in the Bay Area. So I like a lot of things. It's a lot of things at once. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting insight. I wouldn't have expected that. Before we move on, I just want to get to one of the questions from the audience. Cecilia asks, did you understand the challenges you would face in the future as a scientist when you were a teenager? Cindy, do you want to kick off this one?
I had no idea what engineering was to begin with, or why there would, since I didn't really know what engineering was at all, and it didn't really occur to me that there would be more women or more men or anything like that. I mean, I was in school and there were half and half boys and girls in the physics class. So why wouldn't I expect that in engineering too? I was actually shocked when I walked into my first electrical engineering class, which at the time there were almost 200 people in this huge audience, this huge stadium. And there were 2 women and I was one of them. And the professor must have seen the deer in the headlights. Oh my gosh, look. And he beckoned me down front, the support, right? He beckoned, come sit down here, because what you don't see, you can't, if you don't see it, it won't hurt you. Be here, you are you're welcome here. And he is one of my heroes today. So I have definitely found a huge amount of support. And did I know what I was getting into? No, in no ways at all. I didn't know how challenging some of the work would be. I didn't necessarily know how challenging or how fantastic many of my collegial relationships would be. So I didn't know about either the challenges or the fantastic parts. No, I was completely naive.
What about you? Or Jane.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Yeah, I think I was quite naive. I was pretty stubborn as a child, possibly still today. So I think if I probably, I think I maybe had a sense engineering would be hard or challenging, but I had a lot of optimism that the whole kind of like that women had just like, we're going to be equal. Like my generation was gonna be the generation where like women were just going to become equal, and that was just going to be a thing. And it was kind of old school that it wasn't gender equitable. So I was obviously a bit naive in that. I think if I would have known, just because it's so rewarding, right? Science is so rewarding, engineering is so rewarding, having an impact on the world so rewarding. If I would have known everything, I would have done it again, and I would have done it again with gusto. I think if I would have known what I know today, I would have fought for women, myself, other women, far more aggressively earlier in my career. I feel like, in the last few years, I've really found some voice, some support, I think the, hashtag Me Too and other things coming out. So it feels like now I feel much more empowered to fight for women, myself and others. And if there's one regret, I wish I would have had maybe that foresight or insight going into it, because I very much took, kind of what Cindy's approach described is you just have to be tough, right? Like you're a tough lady, like you can do it, push through it, and, be twice as good, and you'll get half as much credit, and that's okay, right? But just be tough, and you'll, keep going. And I was definitely stubborn enough to, to kind of want to show everybody, that I could do it. But I regret a lot in my 20s not having stood up more, particularly for other women, honestly. That's one of the most painful memories looking back. And, in that scene where she's kind of like asking for help from her colleagues, I felt like I've lived every single version of that. I've lived wanting to get help from somebody and not getting it, wanting to get help from somebody and being delighted I got help, being asked for help and giving help, and also being asked for help and saying, don't rock the boat. Like, you'll be the only one that suffers if you do. The men always like turn out fine. It's always the women that speak up that, get their careers derailed. And I've lived all, I've been in all of those roles. And I think one big learning for me, if we could, if I could do it again, it would be to have a lot more confidence to support myself and other women, instead of just being tough and, kind of putting my head down. So it's painful, but luckily I still have time to learn my lessons and then hopefully do better in the future.
Yeah, going into it, I think like everybody else, I knew it would be hard. I loved science and math and solving really, really hard problems. Quite honestly, at age 15, I thought I was going to figure out how to do orthopedic surgery and regrow cartilage. And like, it was only the science. And I grew up with amazing parents and family and teachers who, like, there was no reason that women couldn't do anything. And they instilled into me that you're going to go out and figure out how to save the world, for better or worse. So I knew that challenge was going to be hard. The emotional challenge of like getting your voice and your work seen and heard, I had absolutely no clue what that road would look like. It's been an immensely powerful lesson that I've learned, and I wouldn't have it any other way if I had to redo it. So, but yeah, I think like Tina, learning to speak up is something I wish I had done earlier, both for myself and for other people. Also, like if I had to go in straight out of college again, knowing what I know now, figuring out how to find an ally, figuring out how to find a mentor, an ally who's also female and that I could talk to, because a lot of the ton of feathers stuff we heard about in this film is so alienating, and it shrinks you down and it closes you in. And it doesn't enable you to reach out and find those bridges, whether it's getting advice on, hey, don't speak up now because it's going to hurt you, or here's how we can go help you get what you need to get through to actually do the science and devote your energy to spending time on that work.
And I do want to go into, you know, how you recommend to get a mentor. How do you find those people? Hello, this is my little scientist. How do you find those people in your world who can help be that sounding board? And this dovetails with a question that Jennifer asks, specifically to Cindy. What advice did you give to the women that have reached out to you in 2021 to deal with their situations? If you can share just some of that advice.
Well, actually, I think it is to find the ally, the support, the person that's in charge of looking out for not just you, but the entire culture at your company. So someone's, we really actually all have to own the culture where we work. And fortunately, like within my department, I could not be happier with my young and old colleagues, because if someone says something, they actually listen. And that's an amazing and wonderful thing. So when each of these, and it's not even just these three, I often get asked, you know, what can I do? And sometimes it may look impossible, but the important thing is to find the person who has the power. Now, that may be a woman. It's more likely in my world to be a man. And all of my mentors and my allies and my advocates have been men. And only rarely would I ever cross paths with another woman. So it's important to recognize that it's not just women for women. It's all of us for the culture in which we are working. Because if the culture is good for women, it's good for men too. And all of us are able to do better in a culture that supports each other. So yes, I have talked with each person very individually to say, okay, so who's the person? And there's going to be another person, because you're not going to be able to do this by yourself. You aren't going to be able to handle a problem. By the time they're calling me, the problem's not a little tickle. It's a big old hunk of problem. And somebody or some bodies are going to be able to help with that. You may approach the first person who ought to be able to take care of that, and they don't. Okay, move on, go to the next one. So you have to find the person who has the power to be able to change that problem. So we talk about it carefully and try to decide how to find and approach the person who can help you.
And the women that reached out to you are very lucky to have you and have found you and to be able to come to you with advice. For those people who may either be just getting started out in their career, they might not see a lot of people around them. How would each of you go about advising women to get mentors to discuss these problems? What would be sort of your advice to them?
Can I just ask. Many, many people want to help you. They actually care about you. They care about the culture. They're excited about what you're doing. So find those people and literally don't be shy and just out and out ask. I stumbled upon one of the very best early mentors, who's one of the most powerful men in the IEEE Antennas and Propagation Society, the world in which I live. And I was there at a conference, I listened to his talk, and I walked up to him and said, "Oh, Constantine, I just want to be like you. You're a fantastic teacher, you're a wonderful mentor, you're a great researcher." And you know, a request like that kind of can melt a guy's heart. And he's looked out for me. And I mean, he's like, "Oh, let's go to lunch." And he has looked out for me for many years. And I can call him even now and say, you know, here's something I'm really thinking about. And he can give me his perspective, which is terribly valuable. So I think don't be shy. And if someone like pushes you off, then they're not the right mentor anyway. So don't be shy, walk up and ask and say, here's something that you do that I want to learn. You can't expect one person to be your mentor for everything, because we all have different strengths. So tell someone specifically, here's what you do that I want to learn, and how can they resist helping you?
Jane, I know that you've given a lot of advice to some of your peers and women around you. What has been some of the most valuable advice that you've given?
I think figuring out how to encourage people to elevate their voice, and you're going from not giving them advice on telling them what to do. Obviously, if it's an unsafe situation, like figure out how to do triage and get them out of the problem. But what I think is the most impactful is helping them facilitate these discussions and figuring out what resources they need to solve the problem and engage those discussions. I've got a handful of girlfriends from when I was in my early 20s who are all in technical fields, and they've gone on to different tech careers in the Bay Area and been fighting implicit bias against women. And we've spent a lot of time talking about this, shared resources, and are starting to build, like, here's some go-to reading and materials to facilitate discussions. How do you create a safe space culturally in your team? Find those allies, whether it's a mentor or a coworker or a boss or somebody outside of the company, because if you're at a small company, chances are the resources you need are not going to be inside there. But like, how do you start that discussion in a safe way? And I would say one of the most important things I think that is worth considering is, you know, a lot of the gender bias and harassment training feels like it falls flat because we have it, we're expecting it to, you know, solve all the problems. It's a check the box, it's one and done. And then we never come back to it and nothing changes. So your goal when you start down these paths to have these conversations or fix something is to have a second conversation and keep coming back. And I would say, like, that is something that I am throwing my whole weight behind, however I can help with some younger coworkers that I'm working with and people even outside my company too.
It's interesting that you brought up the bias training being ineffective. There was actually an article in Harvard Business Review last week that said, if we continue on the current path with implicit bias training, it will take us 108 years to reach gender parity. And that number just kind of floored me. And it's really modeling for young boys, right? The future generation. What does gender equity look like? What does humanity look like? What does equity look like? What sort of conversations? How can we be showing them great role models? And it was fascinating to see, you know, women are really influenced by their mother as role models and their fathers, but men were less influenced by the women in their life, and that was really surprising to me. So all of these indirect messages that we're sending our children. So one thing I want to sort of, since we're getting closer to time, and Tina, I want to allow you to offer the opportunity to speak about mentorship, but, you know, are there any organizations that are getting it right here in Utah or elsewhere? It seems like Recursion is doing a fantastic job of keeping that parity level really, really strong. Your position in leadership certainly speaks to that. I think the university and the academia in Utah has been doing a fantastic job. I think most of the presidents of the universities here in Utah are women, or a good number of them. But Benjamin wanted to know that specifically. Who is getting it right in your eyes?
Well, I'd have to agree with Recursion, but I'm obviously maybe a little bit biased. So I'll leave it to others there. I'm actually really curious to the answer to this question. I will say one thing that I've seen is small businesses. I feel like, and maybe these, you know, go beyond STEM, but I think that's one thing that I've observed here that's a little bit different than other places I've lived, of like amazing energy of women in small businesses. And so for me personally, it looks like the bigger opportunity we have here is to get more women into tech, more women into STEM, more women into these, you know, the kind of the biohive, the life science businesses here in Utah, Silicon Slopes, the tech businesses. I don't know if I want to comment on which companies I would put in my, you know, knocking it out of the park bucket list. Although I will say Adobe shows up really well at a lot of things like Women Tech Conference down in the tech industry. But it still seems, you know, just for example, going to the Silicon Slopes conference, which is a great conference, but, you know, just walking around there, it feels like there's a lot of room to grow.
So I don't know that you have to get it perfectly to get it right. So one of the really important things is continual progress. So if you have a community, and I am going to use the electrical engineering department at the University of Utah as an example that I am very comfortable with, where you don't have to have it perfect. You know, someone may say something, think something, something may come up. And if someone said, but then someone needs to say something. And the important thing is to not just denigrate that and say, oh no, we've always done it that way. The thought or phrase, oh, we've always done it that way, is key and dangerous to not having progress. So what you want is people that are looking for continual progress. Perfection actually isn't required. But when you have colleagues who are not only willing to listen, but they're willing to say something too. They're willing to say something to each other. This isn't a women's problem. This is a problem of all of us to own our culture. This is a cultural shift problem. We all own it. So when one man will say to another man or another woman, hey, wait a minute, that wasn't so comfortable. That seemed like an uncomfortable comment to me. What are you thinking? That's a powerful community. So my department has been very, very good at listening and very, very good at progressing. And that's what I think we're looking for, is not perfection, but progress.
That's a good note.
Yeah, I don't know that I could name specific companies that I would say get it right or get it perfect. But one thing that I think that's really interesting to think about is a lot of companies will say, oh, we're an equal opportunity employer, we pay equally, but then it shows up nowhere in their, like, what are their business objectives and goals? And like, is that even on the radar to facilitate that in the culture? Because if you're not even looking at it and tracking it and focusing on it, it's just not going to be there. And I think that's a small way of just reinforcing that within a culture. And that's something to look for if you're looking for a business and a job and that's important to you. Like, ask them how they track it, how they measure it. Are they building it in so it's clear and communicated with everybody across the board?
I think that transparency and visibility is so critical. And I was actually just thinking, I jumped in too soon to answer the question of, when I've been to events, you know, what leaders do I see from what companies? And so, which made me want to give a big shout out to Health Catalyst, which is a healthcare company here, and their CEO, Dan Burton. Every single women's event I've been to since I joined this, he has been there, the CEO. And most companies, it's fine, maybe send people from other departments, or maybe their senior most women. And he has been there, right? And so I think that, like, those are the kind of things, and that's even why Adobe popped to my mind, is like Adobe's at every one of those events. And so I think there's ways, and I would say, kind of maybe going back to this mentorship and being a young woman, don't underestimate your market power today, right? I think we're talking a lot about some of the challenges women face. Now companies have realized the business case for diversity, the ethical case for diversity. All good companies are out there looking to diversify their candidate pool. They're looking for great candidates that are going to bring diverse perspectives. Women have more market power as a talent pool than they have ever had. And so I would just go out in the talent pool and look for the visible signs, look for the companies that measure, look for the corporate leaders that are showing up to support women, that are specifically looking. I used to get freaked out of they're specific. They only want to talk to me because I'm a woman? Don't get freaked out about that. Be like, yeah, if you want me, you better show me. It's going to be awesome, right? And so I think just the owning the market power we have now that the world is finally waking up to both the business case for diversity as well as the ethical case for diversity. And I do think those companies, if companies really care about that, there's a way to suss that out as a candidate. And if you don't suss it as a candidate, you're going to suss it out pretty quickly. After accepting a job, and if it's not right, then go to a company where it is right, and those companies thankfully increasingly do exist.
That's such important framing. We really need to own our market power as women. So if you were to give your final pitch for why we need you in the sciences, why for all of the young women out there, all of the mothers of young women who might be exploring careers in the scientists, what is so great? Why should they become scientists?
I mean, women, and I hate to stereotype all women, but like, I think most women and girls, like we love to make the world a better place, right? We love to help, we love to change the world. Like, what better way to change the world than through science and technology? I mean, think of, before we came on, we were just talking about the COVID vaccine that's come out at record speed, and how that's going to, change all of our lives. And that's all, because of science, right? And I think for some reason, we don't always frame, particularly to young girls, do you like to help people? Yes, you should go into sciences, right? So I guess that's kind of my pitch. If that's a motivator of a driver, like if you believe the world can be a better place in the future than it is today, like you're going to love the sciences and engineering. So that's kind of my, if that's a motivator to you as a young woman, then like give it a try, right? I mean, the worst thing you could do is try something else later on, but.
Jane, Cindy?
Go, Jane.
I mean, science and understanding how things work and how you can make things better, like whether it's in your personal life or, like the COVID vaccine actually being the solution to a global pandemic that gets us all back to where we want to be. It is so cool. And drop any pretense you think you know about the science and just be curious, because the Zoom technology that we're talking on right now, like that's science. COVID vaccines, like how to grow grass better, how to garden better. Like there are so many different aspects of science that literally touches everything in your daily life. And it's just so awesome to be able to learn about that and understand it and grasp it and be a part of it in all these different ways. But as a woman, like we're missing out if you're interested in science and you don't go into it, because that frames how we create solutions, and like your vantage point is really critically important to creating solutions that fit the needs of all people. And I work for a company, we do a lot of user design, and like that empathy vantage points is so critical into getting things that impact people, and not just white men, but like women, people of color, people of different races, people with different genetic backgrounds. Every different vantage point matters. And that's why it's really, really important that we have such a diverse population in the sciences, building the tools that, are gonna save our lives when we grow old, or help us grow nicely and participate in the lives of your grandchildren someday. So it is a fascinating ride. It is so much fun. I highly encourage it, and yeah, go nuts.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. The reason you should go into the sciences is because you can and will and should change the world. When you see problems today, someone has to fix those, and it should be you, because you saw the problem and you have some ideas. And every idea is not going to work, but we need a variety of ideas to solve these really important problems. Without a woman, the vaccine that I got that is likely to save my life wouldn't be here today. We need everyone. We need all of the young boys. We need all of the young girls. And we need your ideas. And it is incredibly fun. It's really the coolest thing you can possibly do. So if you can change the world, that feels amazing. And you can make such a difference. And we need you and we want you. And that's why young women should come into the sciences.
Well, that's a really, really great note to end on. I want to thank each of you today for spending time with us, for having this discussion about the film, Utah Film Center and Science on Screen for bringing this to our community, and wish all of the participants a wonderful evening. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Great night.